I'm going to be talking about the other two types of sugar logic fields, properties dependent field examples and conditionally required field examples. As I mentioned earlier when I was mentioning them, these are often used together. For example, if you have a dependent field that pops up under certain conditions, you may also want that field required under certain conditions. So we're going to take a look at that and then even look at some issues you can run into when you're doing these things. So the first example I'd like to show is a dependent field checking a box prompts for a note. So let's go ahead and bring sugar over here. Here we're looking at an opportunity in my demo instance, and there's a checkbox called Send to PM. Now, that would be Send to Project Manager, and then you could have Note to Project Manager here. This field is not required, but it could be. I'm going to go ahead and type in a note here. This needs to be reviewed and save that. So, what was the point of that? Well, you can use these types of fields to say when this box is checked or when the Note to PM field is filled in. Use Sugar BPMs to send an alert. And you could even send that note then on to the person saying, take a look at this opportunity. Here's the name of the opportunity, the account name, how much it's worth, and this is the note, what you should be interested in. Looking at this on the back end, we can see here in the studio, I have my opportunity fields, a simple checkbox. There's nothing I did special for the checkbox because it doesn't have any sort of calculation. But when we look at the Note to PM box, we notice that I've checked dependent, and it's visible if Send to PM is true. I'm going to go ahead and edit that. And I can see here, if I type in my filter, that Send to PM is a true-false. It's a checkbox. So I don't actually need to set up a formula, whereas if it was a text box or a drop-down, I would need to set up some sort of formula to say when it's equal to this, show. And we'll see that in a second. The next dependent field example I want to show is picking other from a drop-down prompts for a note. So let's jump back here and jump to our account XYZ Funding Incorporated. Here I have an account status field, and if I were to click in danger, suddenly I get a whole new line that pops up, and it says, what is the reason for being in danger? They are not returning my phone calls. So again, this could be useful if you're tracking changes to the reason in danger field. It can be useful if you want to use BPMs. This is one that I did make required. And this one's going to be slightly more complicated formula, as we will see in a second. So let's jump up to our account fields. And we'll find our reason in danger field. You'll notice I have the dependent field checkbox checked. I also have the required field checkbox checked. We're going to start with dependent fields here, edit this formula. And here I am using that equals formula. So we have if the account status is equal to in danger, then I know that I want to make that field visible. And one thing to keep in mind is this is not the display value. This is the database value of the drop-down you're looking to look at. So if you have a drop-down that has maybe some strange database values, you may need to take that into account. For example, I can come into my account status field, edit here, and I see what the database values are in bold. Sometimes for whatever reason, maybe it's an integration, these may have IDs behind them. For example, the ID of 4 may be former customer. And then in your formulas, you would need to use 4. The last type of dependent field example I wanted to show is closing an opportunity prompts for a closed one/lost reason. And this one's a little goofy just because of the way I set it up, and I wanted to show it this way. So let's go ahead and find our opportunity here. Jumping back to our opportunity tracker, corn.com, you can see our status is in progress, but I can't edit the status field because we are using revenue line items. And the status will update based on changes to the sales stage down here. So for example, if I edit this revenue line item to be closed one and save this, my status up here changes to be closed one. At least it should have. Looks like I needed to refresh before I did that. Let's go ahead and save this again. There we go, closed one. Now, reason closed is a required field, but I don't actually have to fill it out because I wasn't editing the opportunity at the same time. So you need to keep in mind how things work, make sure you're testing it out, and maybe do things a slightly different way. So if now, for example, if I click edit here and try to save, it won't let me save because reason closed is a required field. So now I can say they liked our price. I suppose in this case you could always have a workflow or BPM that says if the status becomes closed one or closed lost, and the reason closed is empty, send an alert to the account manager telling them they need to fill in the reason closed. So let's take a look at that one in the studio, and this one's slightly more complicated. If we come over here to find reason closed, again we have dependent checked and required checked, but for now we'll stick with the dependent visible if. I can click edit formula here. Here I did something slightly different. I said is in list. This will tell me it returns true if the item is contained within the list. So I have my field sales status, but then I can't just give a comma separated list of values. I actually have to create a list for it to look in. So I just went ahead and created a list. This is how I prefer to do formulas, sugar logic, based on drop-down values.
This is a different way versus what I did in my if else formula before with the case statuses, where I used or and several equals functions. This is perhaps a little bit cleaner of a way to do it than the way I chose to.
Okay, so let's jump back over here. And since these two were closely related, I combined them into one slide. We have conditionally required field examples here. The account status becomes in danger, require notes about the account status. Opportunity closed, require the reason one lost note. And here I mentioned again that if you have a dependent field, it's not always visible. You don't want it required and hidden. Again, Sugar will handle it, but it's just good practice to make sure you're making them equally restrictive. And to do that, it's as simple as copying and pasting the formula from one to the other. Although certainly if I wanted to, I could delete that and save. Well, you're supposed to be able to. I suppose I could just write true, I think. And this will always be required now. So if I were to come into a different type of field and just check required and save, that field is always required. Then opportunity type is now always a required value because the formula is blank. So as we reload the page to let it refresh our requirements, we can edit this, and our reason closed is still required. Although if I were to go ahead and reopen this, then our reason closed disappears, and we can edit and save without issue. Okay, Megan, do you need to screen share some more?
Uh, in the interest of time, I might not at this point. So I guess you can just keep going off your screen.
Okay.
All right, so a few other things that we wanted to walk through now that we've kind of gone through everything related to calculations. First of all, if you haven't taken a look recently at the types of fields, it's always good to kind of know what your options are. Some of the frequently used options are obviously your text fields, your drop downs, your multi-selects, dates versus date times. Do you want just a date or do you want a date and a time? You've got some numeric options like integers, decimals, floats, and currencies. So really important to just kind of be paying attention when you're creating fields to what type of data you're going to store in them. Numeric fields in particular, it's really important that if you want to be able to do summaries of your numeric data later in reports or in calculated fields, they have to be set up as a numeric field type. So you can't set up a text field and then go to your report and say, add up all the values in this field, because Sugar has not checked to make sure that it only has numbers in it. There is a new field type that was introduced in the 10.2 release in the fall. So that is an auto increment field. If you use the cases module in Sugar, you're probably familiar with the case number field where it auto assigns a number as every case is created. You can now add auto increment fields to any module that you want them in. You could have multiple auto increment fields in a single module if you wanted. They are numeric only, so they can't be like a combination of text and then a number. They're just numeric fields. But you can set a starting value. So if you want them to always start, the lowest one should be 1,000 or whatever number you want, you can set that. And when you create a new auto increment field, it will automatically assign values to existing records. It's going to do them alphabetically by the Sugar ID for some reason, but it will auto assign existing records to have a value. So once you create an auto increment field, every record will automatically have a number in that field. Some other settings that are available when you're working with fields in Studio. First of all, a lot of field types will let you adjust the global search settings. So global search, the search at the top of your screen, is controlled through, in part, the field level global search settings. This lets you choose whether or not that particular field is included in the searching when someone does a global search. And if you turn global searching on for a field, it's going to then ask you for a boost value, which is what it uses to rank the matches in terms of importance. So for example, let's say you have an account named 123 manufacturing, and you have a phone number that has a 123 in it. When someone searches 123, which of those do you want to come up higher in their search results? The account name 123 manufacturing or the phone number with 123 in it? Your boost values are how you can tell Sugar which one you think is more important and which one should come first. The default settings for that, for the fields that are searched by default, range from 0 to 2. So, if you're looking for something to be very important, you might give it like a 1.9 setting or a 1.7 setting. For something that's not very important, you might give it a 0.5 setting. Just to kind of keep it in line with the existing fields. Things like account name and contact name are the ones that are in the 1.9 somethings by default. You can also select whether or not to audit fields. Auditing fields means it's going to log every change to those fields in the audit log in the activity stream. So you can see every time it changed, when it was changed, and by who. The activity stream in the audit log can fill up with a lot of data if you're auditing a lot of fields. So you do want to give some thought to whether or not it's actually important to audit that particular field. If you do have a lot of data in your activity stream, there's a scheduler that you can turn on as an administrator to automatically delete data older than a specified number of months. So you can kind of decide how many months of activity stream history you want to keep and then automatically delete stuff older than that. You can also set comment and help text through Studio fields. Comment text is only visible in Studio, so it's basically a place for multiple system administrators to talk about what a field is being used for or put notes in about a field. Help text is actually shown to the user. So sometimes you might see when you're working in Sugar, if you hover over a field or you're editing a field, it will pop up with some additional information. That's the help text. You can also modify the import and duplicate merge settings. These control whether or not that particular field is shown when you're importing data in the list of fields and whether it's shown when you're merging duplicates in the list of fields. So if you're not using a field, you can disable that so that you're not showing unnecessary fields on those screens. And then finally, another important field property is mass updating. Mass updating is available for certain types of fields and lets you include that field in the list of fields you can mass update when you're working in Sugar. All right, and a last couple of things here. First of all, there's a new layout that you can edit as of version 10.0. So this would be the spring release from last year. This controls which fields are displayed when you're previewing a record. So previously, you couldn't control which fields were displayed on that particular view. It was kind of just defaulted in. Now you can actually modify what's shown on the preview view. And then this is new. It's not actually Studio, but just a fun bonus fact. As of the 10.2 release, user preference settings are now available for subpanel lists as well as module lists. So the functions you have on your module list views, like resizing columns, reordering columns, and turning columns off and on, are now available on all of your subpanels as well as your list views.